the broke morning and hidden burdens. The alarm buzzed with a shrill insistence, slicing through the fragile quiet of the small apartment. Maria groaned, her body aching from a night spent chasing deadlines on her laptop while keeping one ear attuned to the soft, even breaths of her 5-year-old son, Liam, sleeping beside her. The cramped room smelled faintly of leftover takeout, detergent, and the faint tang of anxiety that clung to Maria like a second skin. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, careful not to wake Liam, whose small hand curled instinctively in her direction. The morning light barely filtered through the threadbare curtains, and she winced at the thought of another day of endless work with barely enough to cover rent. Poverty wasn't a single, glaring problem. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a cold spot in the apartment, a bag of groceries that never seemed to last, a broken washing machine that meant one more trip to the laundromat. Maria tiptoed to the kitchenette, where the ancient kettle whined to life. She measured out the instant coffee, not bothering with sugar, and sipped the bitter warmth while glancing at the stack of unpaid bills pinned haphazardly to the fridge. The numbers seemed to mock her. Even after working 2 jobs, the gap between her income and the rent seemed to widen with every passing month. "Mommy?" Liam's sleepy voice drifted from the bed. Maria turned just in time to see him sitting up, tousled hair sticking out in every direction. His brown eyes, wide and innocent, met hers, and for a moment, the world's weight seemed to lift, just a fraction. "Morning, pumpkin," she said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. She leaned down to kiss his cheek, tasting the faint hint of toothpaste and cereal. Despite the exhaustion clawing at her every limb, her heart swelled with a fierce protectiveness. Liam was her anchor, the one person whose happiness could make even the bleakest day bearable. They moved through the morning routine with practiced efficiency. Maria dressed Liam in the only clean set of clothes left, wiped the sleep from his face, and coaxed him to eat a small breakfast of toast and peanut butter. All the while, her mind raced through the day's tasks, dropping Liam off at daycare, clocking in 8 hours at the diner, then a second shift at the cleaning service. Every moment demanded energy she didn't have. "Mommy, can we play later?" Liam asked, his voice tinged with hope. Maria forced a tired smile, nodding.
"Of course, sweetie."
"I promise." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she knew it was a necessary one. Her exhaustion was inevitable, not just from the physical labor, but from the constant mental juggling, the calculations, the worries, the unrelenting pressure to make ends meet. She couldn't let Liam see the cracks in the facade. He needed her strong, even when she felt she was breaking inside. By the time they left the apartment, Maria's shoulders ached, and her steps were heavy. The stroller wobbled under the weight of Liam's small body and the grocery bag she carried. She was aware of every eye that passed them, every whisper of pity she imagined. Pride made her straighten her back, even when her bones screamed for relief. As she kissed Liam goodbye at the daycare gate, she felt a pang of guilt. She longed to stay, to spend an extra hour playing, to laugh with him over the smallest things. But the clock was merciless. The diner awaited, then the cleaning job, then the relentless evening that would leave her collapsing into bed, only to repeat the cycle the next day. Maria squared her shoulders and walked away, the burdens of the world pressing down like invisible chains. Today, like every day, she would survive. Tomorrow, she would fight again. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of her heart, she held on to hope, a fragile, flickering hope that one day, maybe, the weight would lift, even if just a little. The bus smelled of damp coats and the faint tang of exhaust. Maria clutched Liam's small hand as they stepped aboard, her grocery bag swinging from her arm. Her shoulders ached from the day, but the mental exhaustion weighed far heavier than the physical. She found a seat near the back, careful not to jostle the other passengers, and settled Liam onto her lap. His small weight, usually a comfort, felt like an anchor dragging her down today. As the bus lurched forward, Maria closed her eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to wish she could collapse entirely. Her head leaned against the cold window, and she inhaled deeply, trying to center herself. She hadn't realized she had been gripping Liam's hand so tightly until he murmured, "Mommy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetie," she whispered, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Just a little tired." Across the aisle, a man in a tailored suit caught her eye, or rather, she felt it, the quiet weight of his gaze. He was sitting upright, calm, exuding a quiet authority that made the air around him feel different. There was nothing ostentatious about him. No gold rings, no flashy accessories, just a presence that seemed to quietly assert itself. Maria felt an inexplicable tension rise, the kind that comes from feeling observed but unsure why. The man didn't smile or nod. He simply watched, casually, as if noting small details without judgment. Maria felt self-conscious, tugging her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and adjusting Liam's jacket. She had never been one to notice attention, especially from strangers, but there was something about him, calm, deliberate, that unsettled her. The bus hit a pothole, and Maria jolted, her elbow grazing Liam lightly. He whimpered, clutching at her. She bent down to soothe him, whispering assurances, and in the movement, her head slipped sideways, resting against the bus window. She didn't notice her eyes closing. The world had shrunk to warmth and exhaustion, the gentle hum of the bus, and the small weight of her son in her lap. The man across the aisle leaned subtly forward, his eyes softening as he watched the tired mother. There was something human in the vulnerability she radiated. He could have turned away, ignored her as countless people did every day, but something in her posture, the small sigh of surrender she had allowed herself, pulled at his curiosity. A sudden lurch of the bus snapped Maria awake. Her head had slipped just far enough to brush against the man's shoulder. She froze, mortified, immediately straightening and fumbling for words. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." The man's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes, though carefully contained. "It's all right," he said, his voice low, calm. "No harm done." Maria's cheeks burned. She tightened her grip on Liam, whispering an apology to him, as if that could undo the awkwardness. In her flustered state, she misinterpreted his calm demeanor for judgment, imagining him thinking her careless or rude. But he wasn't judging. He was simply observing, quietly, like someone who had spent a lifetime reading people without interfering. And though Maria didn't know it yet, the small, unintentional touch, the brief, accidental contact, was the spark that began to shift something in him, something dormant he hadn't expected to notice in a crowded bus. As the bus continued its route, a subtle tension lingered between them, unspoken and unacknowledged. Maria busied herself with Liam, adjusting his scarf, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, trying to shrink into invisibility. The man, however, continued to watch, curious but restrained, aware of the boundary yet drawn to her presence. Neither spoke again for the rest of the ride, yet an unspoken connection had formed, a tiny thread woven from fatigue, vulnerability, and quiet observation. A misunderstanding hung in the air, delicate and charged. Maria, embarrassed and anxious, assumed the man might disapprove. He, intrigued but respectful, had no intention of judging at all. When the bus finally approached Maria's stop, she gathered Liam and her bag with deliberate care, grateful for the brief reprieve from human interaction. As she stepped off into the chilly morning, she didn't look back. Yet in the man's gaze, following the bus as it pulled away, there was the faintest trace of interest, quiet, patient, and unassuming, like a seed planted in soil too busy to notice, yet destined to grow. The train car hummed softly, a gentle rhythm that seemed to pulse through Maria's weary body. Her eyes flickered over Liam's small face as he napped lightly in his stroller, the slow rise and fall of his chest grounding her in a fleeting sense of peace. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her muscles ached, her mind spun with calculations and worries, but the warmth of the train and the quiet lull of motion were almost hypnotic. She sank into the vacant seat beside the man from the bus, unaware of his presence at first. Her bag sagged heavily beside her, groceries shifting noisily with every jolt. Maria's eyelids grew heavier, the weight of exhaustion pressing on her with relentless insistence. She tilted her head, almost unconsciously, and felt the edge of her shoulder brush against his arm. He stiffened slightly, but didn't move away. Observing her, he recognized the signs, the tension in her jaw, the tremor in her fingers as she massaged them absently, the tiny sigh that escaped her lips as if the day's burdens had coalesced into a single, tangible weight. His mind noted it all, the fatigue etched into her posture, the quiet determination in her small gestures, the invisible scars of a life lived under constant strain. Her head slowly tipped, and before he could adjust or stop her, she leaned against his shoulder, eyes closing in surrender. The motion was timid, accidental, but it carried the raw honesty of someone utterly spent. His instinct was to shift away, to maintain the professional distance he always did. And yet he didn't. He allowed her to rest. The world outside the train windows blurred into streaks of gray and gold, but inside, time seemed to slow. He felt the faint, rhythmic sound of her breathing, shallow and uneven at first, then gradually steadying. There was no suggestion of intimacy, no deliberate closeness, only the human act of letting someone exist without judgment, without interference. And somehow, that felt weighty, significant, almost sacred. For a fleeting moment, his thoughts drifted. He imagined the mornings behind her tired eyes, the endless grind, the compromises made, the invisible emotional labor that never garnered recognition. He didn't know her story, not fully, but he understood enough. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was the kind that burrows deep into the soul. And right now, she trusted the world enough, trusted even him, enough to let herself be vulnerable. Maria shifted slightly in her sleep, and he braced his arm reflexively, adjusting to make her more comfortable. Her cheek rested lightly against his jacket, and he resisted the urge to comment, to move, to do anything that would break the fragile peace. Watching her, he felt an unfamiliar tug, not attraction, not sentimentality, but a quiet, protective awareness, the recognition that someone so small, so tireless in giving to others, deserved a moment of rest. The train rattled along, each jolt sending a soft sigh through her lips. He noticed it all, the faint creases around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing, the way her hands relaxed in her lap. There was something profoundly human in this. Two strangers, briefly sharing a space, one letting down her defenses, the other honoring it. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The subtext hung in the air like a melody, exhaustion recognized, vulnerability respected, small kindness offered. In this quiet, cinematic tableau, the boundaries between them remained clear, yet the emotional weight was unmistakable. When Maria finally stirred, blinking up at him in confusion and apology, he merely smiled softly and shook his head. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Rest if you need to." And in that simple sentence, heavy with unspoken understanding, Maria felt something shift, a tiny reprieve from the relentless grind, a flicker of safety in a world that rarely allowed her such comfort. She straightened, cheeks warmed with embarrassment, but the moment lingered, not as romance, but as a rare, human acknowledgement that someone saw her exhaustion, her struggle, and did not turn away. The afternoon sun slanted sharply through the city streets, glinting off glass windows and casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Maria hurried along, juggling Liam's hand and the overfilled grocery bag, her mind already running through the evening's tasks. She was so focused on keeping him upright, on keeping herself steady, that she didn't notice the loose manhole cover just ahead. A sudden slip, a misstep on the slick edge, sent Maria's heart lurch. The groceries tumbled, a cascade of plastic bottles and bread spilling across the pavement. Liam cried out as he stumbled, and in a heartbeat, a sharp, uncontrolled movement sent her toward the open manhole. Time seemed to slow. Her mind screamed, instincts taking over. She barely had time to think before a strong hand shot out from beside her, gripping her elbow firmly. She froze, suspended between panic and relief. Careful, the man's voice, calm but urgent, echoed in her ears. It was the same voice from the bus and train, measured and steady. Maria blinked up, stunned. He was already adjusting Liam with his free hand, steadying the small boy as if he had done this 100 times before. Her groceries lay in disarray, her pride more bruised than her body. I'm fine, she stammered, cheeks burning with embarrassment. Thank you. He didn't let go immediately, his eyes scanning her carefully, reading the tension in her muscles, the shock in her expression. You weren't fine. That was close, he said, his tone factual but gentle. And you shouldn't be carrying everything at once with him in one hand. Maria wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, but the lump in her throat caught the words. He was right, of course. She had been pushing herself, as always, ignoring her limits in the constant struggle to do enough, to be enough. Liam tugged at her sleeve, worried. Mommy, are you okay? I'm okay, sweetie, she whispered, trying to smile through the flutter of nerves and embarrassment. Really? The man knelt slightly to adjust Liam's scarf and then gestured toward the scattered groceries. Let me help with that, he said. Maria hesitated but realized she had no choice. Together, they gathered the fallen items, the moment quiet but charged with unspoken understanding. As the last bag was lifted, Maria felt an unexpected weight, not in her arms, but in her chest. The man's intervention had shifted something subtle, almost imperceptible. He had entered her chaos not with judgment, but with steady presence and calm authority. And in that simple act, he had claimed a small space in her trust, without force, without expectation. She glanced at him, noticing the faint crease at the corner of his eyes, the watchful calm that had always unnerved her on the bus and train. He wasn't imposing. He wasn't intrusive. But he had acted decisively when it mattered. Thank you, she said again, this time with sincerity she could feel in her bones. He nodded, straightening. Be careful next time. And take a moment for yourself. Rest isn't weakness. Maria blinked, caught off guard by the gentle authority in his words. She wanted to argue, to insist she didn't have that luxury, but deep down, she knew he was right. As he walked away, the city's noise swallowed him again, leaving her standing amid the scattered groceries and the lingering pulse of adrenaline. Liam tugged at her hand, and she bent to scoop him up, holding him close. The dynamic had shifted, though she couldn't quite name how. He had intervened, yes, but more than that, he had acknowledged her struggle, her exhaustion, her human frailty. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone in the world. But as they continued down the street, her chest still racing, Maria couldn't shake a subtle unease. The city was full of unexpected dangers, yes, but this encounter had stirred something more, a quiet awareness that life could change in a single instant, and that some people, strangers, maybe, carried the ability to alter the course of a day without even trying. The incident lingered in her mind like a heartbeat, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and subtle apprehension. And somewhere, beneath it all, a tiny seed of tension had been planted, one that promised the coming days would be far more complicated than they had seemed before. Maria tucked Liam tightly under her arm as they navigated the crowded sidewalk, the city buzzing around them like a living organism. Her heart still thumped from the near accident earlier, the adrenaline leaving her limbs weak and trembling. She tried to steady herself, scanning the street for potholes, uneven pavement, anything that might trip them again. But life, as always, had a way of testing her resilience. A sudden, sharp shout echoed from across the street. A delivery truck had lost control, swerving dangerously toward a corner where a group of pedestrians was frozen in panic. Without thinking, Maria clutched Liam closer and took a step back, but the edge of the sidewalk gave way slightly under her heel. She stumbled, barely catching herself. Then a hand, strong, decisive, grabbed her arm. The same man, the billionaire. His eyes were sharp, scanning the street, calculating, and before Maria could protest, he pulled her and Liam safely to the side, out of harm's way. Maria's pulse raced, her breath coming in shallow bursts. I thank you, she stammered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine and the gasps of onlookers. "You need to slow down," he said calmly, almost as if scolding a child, but there was concern in his tone, not impatience. "You're carrying too much. You're exhausted. And you can't do everything alone." Maria's lips parted in protest, but before she could reply, the truck screeched past, missing them by mere inches. The collective gasp of the crowd reminded her how close they had come. Her knees threatened to buckle, and she gripped Liam tightly, feeling the small boy's heartbeat against her chest. The man looked at her, eyes lingering in a way that made her chest tighten, not romantically, but with an intensity that suggested he had noticed everything: her exhaustion, her determination, her struggles. "You need help," he said quietly. "And I'm offering it." Maria froze, torn between instinctive distrust and the overwhelming reality that she could not carry this life alone. But before she could respond, a sharp ringing noise cut through the chaos, her phone, vibrating insistently in her bag. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. The screen flashed red with the notification: "Liam's school, urgent. Pickup required immediately." Her stomach dropped. Something was wrong at school. Her heart raced, not from fear for herself this time, but for her son. She opened her mouth to explain, to tell him she had to go, but the billionaire had already stepped forward, blocking the street with a calm authority that made the traffic freeze instinctively. He was a presence that demanded attention, control, and safety all at once. "You're coming with me," he said decisively. "I can get you there faster."
Maria blinked, stunned.
She wanted to argue. She always wanted to argue, but the urgency in his tone, the weight of the city still humming dangerously around them, left her powerless. She knew he was right. With Liam in her arms, she followed him, moving swiftly through the throng of onlookers. Her mind raced.
Who was this man, really?
Why was he suddenly involved in her life in such a direct, inexplicable way? She didn't trust strangers, hadn't for years, but right now, she had no choice. As they disappeared down an alley to avoid the main street, the sound of the city fading behind them, a small, cold dread settled in her chest. Something about this intervention didn't feel entirely accidental. And somewhere deep down, she realized this was only the beginning. The billionaire glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low, heavy with intent. "And it's not safe for you to be alone right now." Maria's eyes widened. "Safe," she echoed. "What do you mean?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he quickened his pace, Liam clinging to her, leaving Maria racing to keep up. Behind them, the streets thrummed with the normal chaos of the city, oblivious to the storm that was quietly closing in. And in that moment, Maria understood. Life as she knew it was about to change. Everything, the struggles, the exhaustion, the small, fleeting moments of safety, was about to be upended. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The alleyway ahead seemed endless, shadows stretching unnaturally. And as the billionaire led them forward with a determined stride, Maria's mind raced with questions, fear, and an inkling of hope she wasn't ready to admit. Somewhere, in the uncertain silence between breaths and footsteps, a truth waited to be revealed. A truth that would change everything.